Lachmanin awoke in the dark, his head pounding from wine and the various blows he'd suffered that night. In his drunken rage, it had taken scores of men to bring him down, and during the chaos, he'd lost count of the limbs he snapped and skulls he split. He flexed his fists and dried blood cracked across his skin. His arms sagged under the weight of the heavy chains shackling his wrists. He was in the Pathra dungeons, somewhere in the deepest bowels, if he had to guess. Daga's mercy, what have I done? He posed the rhetorical question to himself, but he hoped some other prisoner might hear. Would you like to be free of those chains, Kale? From an inky corner, a pair of eyes materialized. At least, he believed they were eyes. Instead of pupils, shone speck of light like stars in a winter sky. A figure stepped forward, and Lachmanin could see the man was tall, blade thin, and bearded, his lean frame swaddled in tattered robes. You're a meddler. You know how Kales treat meddlers, he said. I do, but I also know how the Four Kingdoms treat drunken Kales. Tomorrow, you will be tortured. There will be an audience. They will cheer and hurl stones while you're led into the court and flayed. Surely, you would avoid such a fate if you could. Why, sorcerer, don't you know? A pact with a meddler is the surest road to hell. I'm probably already damned just for having this conversation, he continued. But let's say I don't believe in all that nonsense. That I'm willing to accept your help. What do you want from me in return? You've a humorous tongue for a Kale. And fortunately, you're not lacking the characteristic fortitude of your brethren. What I have witnessed last night suggests you may be strong enough for an errand I propose. I need a bodyguard, someone willing to shed blood, a man with nothing to lose. Things being as they are, I believe you are that man. Lachmanin cleared his throat, tongued the gob it brought up, and spat to the floor. I believe you're right. That is but just a taste of what to expect within the pages of To Walk on Worlds by Matthew John. Matt is a recognizable figure among the sword and sorcery fandom, being one of the hosts of the Rogues in the House podcast, and also being a lead developer and contributor to Monolith Games. He's worked on projects such as the official Conan board game, and he's also working on the upcoming Conan role-playing game, which I'm personally pretty excited about. But there are those who are watching this video who might have not heard of Matt John and his many exploits, but that story can only be told well by the man himself. So, let's get on with it, shall we? Tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you, Matt John?
I am Matt. I am Matt John, and well, that's my moniker. I have a full name that I try to keep a separation from church and state, or rather, day job and moonlighting. It's not like I'm trying to hide. I just want to make sure, as a teacher, I don't want to feel, people to feel like, oh, I'm selling my product to their kids.
Yeah, I get it. I meant more, sorry, it was a bit of a vague question. I meant more like, what do you do? What are you known for? That type of stuff, just so people who may not have heard of you to get to know you a bit more.
A lot would know me, I suppose, from the Rogues in the House podcast, which is our fairly long-running sword and sorcery, heroic fantasy horror adjacent, all that stuff podcast. Geez, man, we've been doing that almost maybe 5 or more years. Time has been quite a warp. So we do that. We chat on the Rogues in the House podcast. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Rogues in the House. And our website is Rogues in the House Presents, where you can see some of the stuff that we've been publishing lately, which is pretty exciting. Um, I also do. I work for Monolith Games, who publish the Conan board game. Been working for them for geez, man, 7 years now. I think I've been doing projects there. So yeah, the massively successful Conan board game is something I'm now lead developer on and have been developing for a few years. I didn't write the game. I wrote the solo system, and I do some other RPG work freelance for. I've done some for Modiphius and Nightfall Games on their Terminator RPG. And my biggest accomplishment there is having been lead developer on the new Conan role-playing game, The Hyborian Age, which will debut, quarter 4 on Kickstarter this year. It's ready. It's rocking. It's an exciting / nerve-wracking time.
Yeah, I can
So that's
imagine.
me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It's fun, right? Because it's a lot of like really cool bucket list items that I really don't take for granted. And I also try to make them not feel like work, right?
Yeah.
So crack off the projects that I can, so that my passion and my time can be there to put my best work in, because it's kind of nice when you as a creative, and would stress me out terribly. What I'm privileged to do here is, get extra money on top of the other things that I do, and really choose the projects that I love. So it's a gas, man. It's awesome.
I guess my other second question would be, and I've asked this to pretty much every guest, but what was your sword and sorcery origin story? What was that thing that got you into this genre? Be it a book, film, or whatever.
Yeah. So, so I've talked about this on Rogues in the House before, and my memories are it's somewhere between Conan the Destroyer, Conan the Barbarian issue 101, and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Now I know He-Man is not strictly sword and sorcery. Aesthetically it looks pretty sword and sorcery and Sword and Planet, and it's got the barbarian vibe. But it was those things, I think, that really just gave me that siren call, right? And I mean, I know I'm not the only used to be skinny kid consuming this material who's like, muscle men of action, people with can take care of business with their muscles and their brawn, and they look cool. And so, Conan always spoke to me, and I've alluded to Conan issue 101 there, where it's a John Buscema cover, where he's fighting a Kushite over a log, and below them is this giant spider just that looks so weird and creepy. And I have distinct memories of being a kid at my grandfather's cottage, and like reenacting that on the deck that goes out to the wharf, the little anyways, stuff like that with it. It was like with an old broomstick as a spear. So yeah, man, that kind of stuff. And then I only got into the Howard really when I was graduating high school and going into university, and just reading the old the Lancers that we had at the time, and buying issues of Savage Sword of Conan, and I was like, oh my god, this is my thing. This is as a lifelong nerd, this is the thing I love the most. It's got it all.
How did you go from consuming this media and then getting this beauty here published? So how did the Anthology came to be?
Thank you so much.
No worries, man. It's an awesome read.
So, at a certain point, I've dabbled in all kinds of different creative mediums in my life. It's one of those, I'll die on the vine if I don't do something, right? To, self-expression, whatever. Maybe it's vanity. Maybe it's just you want to tell stories, whatever it is. And so at a certain point, I decided I want to tell stories, and I want to do it without having to use anyone else's money. Right? I wanted to, because I dabbled in filmmaking. I thought about that. And then, you're going to be rolled up in certain committees with that and everything else. So I realized with the written word, nothing is stopping you from writing the best story ever. Period.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to do that. No one's going to do that. But it's that if you pay some dues and you hustle and you grind and you learn to write, then feasibly you can write some badass stories. And so, as an English major, a lit major in high school, and someone who's always appreciated the written word and storytelling in general, I kind of set out to publish, and like we'll give you royalties if they show up presses, kind of thing. And they weren't great, but I learned a lot along the way. And I don't know, I'm pretty hard on myself. I think a lot of people say that. They're like, dude, stop saying you suck, you're good-ish. But I realize at this point I don't suck. It's just that I want to, if people are going to take the time to read the thing and buy the thing that I have written, I want it to be good. And so, yeah, I'm at a fairly comfortable place with that. And I mean, I just started writing sword and sorcery stuff, which felt very natural. And I sent it out to just presses and publications that I thought were achievable. And one by one, I started, getting acceptances and getting pay rates, up until recently getting, those sought after 8 cents a word pro rates, which I've managed on 3 occasions now, which is, it shouldn't matter that much. You should write for the love, and I do, but I also am I am a leech for validation, and I don't mind telling you. So it feels good.
It's something you love doing, and it's nice to get
Mhm.
a little. It's like bonus money, I suppose. I don't know the right word
Exactly.
for it. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought of like writing. You kind of put it really well about filmmaking. Writing is the most accessible, but also inaccessible form of expression.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you're not restricted by budget, and you're not restricted by scope, but you do have
hmm
to, especially, you do have to like chisel away at some of the amateurish things, storylines,
Yeah.
story beats, and all that. It is a balancing act. So yeah, it's quite a
hmm
journey though, and I must have been satisfying.
It is, and it's like, yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of people talk about that, that 10,000 hours principle or whatever. You put 10,000 hours into a craft, and then you become adept. Um, and I think there's probably something to that. I don't know if I suspect over my 42 years of writing anything, I've probably reached that at this juncture. But it, I often think it would be terrifying. When you hear people who have horrible accidents and they have to relearn to walk, or they have to relearn to speak,
Mm,
or things like that, right?
yeah.
I have a weird terror of, like, imagine gaining, like, learning to do this for so long and then it all being robbed from you and having to do it again. It's like you can feel that time that you put in and the knowledge, um, and it becomes precious, right? You're like, I did it. And to be honest, I'm not someone who did a lot of that in my life. I didn't stick with a lot of stuff.
Mm,
So this has been good. It's been rewarding. Yeah, and all of those stories I sold over time, the good ones, I have plucked. I don't know if you know how these things kind of work, but essentially you sell first publishing rights to publishers, and then they basically get a crack at publishing it first. They kind of own the rights for 6 months or a year, and then they revert to you. So I've wanted to release a collection for a long time, but I kept selling to like bigger publishers, and then I had to reset the clock of like waiting for the rights to revert.
right.
And so
Kind of a
this
waiting
book doesn't
game.
even have the, well, yeah, but the To Walk on Worlds is, there's 2 stories out to be published in 2 publishers that are like my most proud of, for having sold, at New Edge Sword and Sorcery and Old Moon Quarterly. There's 2 stories out in the wild that have not been published yet, but have been sold. And so I'm restarting the clock again for next year.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, obviously the book follows these 2 main characters, Magnus and Lachmanen. Is that how you say
Yep.
Lachmanen? Right. I am butchering that.
Yeah, Loch Manon.
Lachmanen.
Sort of like, no, it's like Loch Ness, the Loch Ness monster, Loch Manon.
Okay.
I kind of pulled it from. I like the name Lachlan. It's kind of a
Yeah.
unisex name. It sounds powerful, Loch.
Mm.
And the word man is in there, Loch Manon. It sounds muscular. And I had a old D&D character named MacManus. I mean, McManus is a Scottish name as far as I know, but I kind of did the Robert E. Howard thing and did MAK space Manus. And then I don't know, Lochman, and just it rolled off the tongue, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a cool, tough dude name, so let's go with that. And you know, he's a Kale, which is sort of like a Gale, pseudo, you know, Celt, Scottish, however you want to look at it, right? It's all somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for here? Analogous a little bit, but not fully.
Yeah, I get it. No, but Maxis, I think personally, he's a character that I was very drawn to because I recently finished reading Dark Crusade, which is a...
Okay.
Right, so... What's that?
Karl Edward Wagner.
Yeah, Karl Edward Wagner. Yeah, right.
Kane
story. And Maxis really struck me as an asshole Gandalf, in the sense of exactly how Kane behaves. Like he goes into this random cabin in the woods, and there's a girl and her brother and her younger brother, and he's just Maxis is so menacing, and it's like, oh, you know what he's capable of. You know, in previous stories. So how did you develop that character also?
So this is interesting. I might reveal some secrets or some spoilers here, in the sense that in that story, that's not Maxis.
Is it not?
No. So
okay.
But I have deliberately left it so that the reader might assume so.
Okay.
And there's something I'm currently writing right now which will dispel. So the truth is, he is described exactly as Maxis is, and he's definitely more of a bastard in that story. And I would say when I originally wrote it, I sort of hedged my bets and was like, is this Maxis? Would he do that, or is he some other meddler? But even at the time when I wrote that, I deliberately kept a name out of it. He didn't name himself, and I'm kind of playing with a few kernels for that for book 2. I was actually just working on something for that today. But you'll notice in one of the stories, which is called, this is the one I had published in The Magician's Skull, A Simple Errand, he goes to another planet in order to create clones of himself. Right? And then after that, now I don't think I can.
If it's
I can't confirm it would be that or not.
It's a spoiler,
but
don't mention
yeah,
it.
it's well, and I mean, there's certain I've dated the stories as well, intentionally, and it sounds stupidly pretentious, but there are certain things I put down there to kind of not mess with the readers, but to sort of make them go, huh, I wonder if this is that. Yeah. So is that Maxis? Is it even possible for it to be Maxis's clone? I don't know, readers. Check it out. But the truth is, it's funny that you brought up Kane, because that was very much intentional. I do love Karl Edward Wagner stories of Kane, but what I love most about them is that you've got this bastard protagonist, right? And he's very much, he's megalomaniacal, I think. Kane, right? Absolutely. He's really just out for himself. He wants the power. He does some things that are vile. And I wanted that, but I didn't want him to have a strong sword arm as well, right? I wanted him to have his vulnerabilities. And one of the things about him that I've not broken this yet,
right,
is that I wrote one story from his point of view, but no others. Which ends up allowing me to kind of mess around with expectations, like, is this Maxis? Is the meddler in this story Maxis? Because he's not in all of them, and that's kind of all I'll say.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because I don't want to spoil it, but I can't remember the name, but there's this one story where he transforms one guy into a tree, which was really awesome body horror work, by the way. And I'm pretty sure in that story, he was just that character was just referred to as the hooded figure. So that actually recontextualizes a lot within the book. That's actually really cool.
Yeah. So in Man of Xeris, you basically have a guy named Volka, who is another meddler who, and Maxis won't abide others. I mean, he would if they were doing what he told them to.
Mm.
But I kind of made at a certain point, his line is, I'm not going to really mess with you unless I need something from you and you don't give it to me, or if you step in my way, and then I
Right.
will do whatever I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in that one, you can just, assuming it is Maxis anyways, and not a
Mm.
clone pretending he's Maxis or even believing he's Maxis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, you can tell he had a vendetta and wanted to take it out on that guy. He was like,
Yeah.
you're stepping on my toes here, buddy, and
Right.
you're gonna suffer for that.
Why I want to talk about kind of the world building aspect of it, because these stories were kind of separate,
Mhm.
and you can, I think, still read them as separate stories, which I like. I like when
Yep.
anthologies do that. But obviously, there is this timeline, there are these time skips, there is this central theme of the ancients, which I found was really interesting. And obviously, Max is cloning himself.
Mhm.
So, how did you create this world beforehand, or did this sort of develop as you were putting these stories into this anthology?
So I when I set out to learn to write, right, when I was basically saying, all right, Matt, you're gonna try and get good at this thing. You're gonna, do some research, listen to some how-tos, read some books on writing, and then kind of sort that advice, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
curate the advice that I
yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to
yeah,
take.
yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, and so I said to myself, I'm not doing prior world building at all,
Mm-hmm.
because I've heard if I had $1 for every time someone got really excited about a world building thing they were doing, um, and then if I had another dollar for that actually materializing into stories,
Mm-hmm.
I'd be quite rich indeed. It's that I wanted to learn to write. That meant I wanted to learn how to handle point of view. I wanted to make sure I was showing, not telling. I wanted to play with sentence structure.
Yeah,
Those were the important nuts and bolts of the thing. Because if your prose isn't good, it's not gonna work. It has to at least be good. It has to be competent.
yeah.
And so I built the world based on what I needed for those stories. So each story that I told, I expanded the world in such a way that it would make it work for that story.
Mm.
And once I did that enough times, I kind of had to sort of buckle down and be like, okay, this can happen, that can't happen. This can happen, but maybe only once, or, you know. So you have to come to grips with the world building at a certain point to make sure there's internal consistency. But no, man, I basically wrote those as it was necessitated. I wrote it as the sort of characters I wanted to follow, because really, if I was writing this anthology as if I knew I was going to do 11 stories about this or that, I would probably have, the point of view wouldn't change so frequently within those stories.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what happened was I sold a bunch of stories that were good enough that people bought them. Um, and so I wanted to find, I mean, I always had planned on compiling them, but then when it came down to, all the rights are back with me. Even a few stories I had published, I put on the cutting room floor because they didn't really hold up for me.
Mm.
Um, and at that point, I was like, okay, how do I order these in such a way that they're most compelling? And so I immediately threw out chronology. I was like, that's not going to work because you can't have this before that if you're trying to anyways.
Yeah.
I basically just got out my scalpel and my stitches, and I decided, okay, how can I present these stories in such a way that there will still be surprises, and that you will be able to sort of follow little breadcrumbs. And I'm actually super
Mm.
shocked somewhat that, like, it seems to have worked out well. Like, I
Yeah.
haven't had anyone respond and say, these are all out of whack. There's no real thing here. And I think the reason it works is because, 80% of them stand entirely on their own. Um, but yeah, there seems to be a cohesion and, a desire for more. And so looking ahead at book 2, I'm like, all right, what I have more possibilities, right? I can
Yeah.
fill in gaps. I can. So
And
yeah, I mean, that's really how that went. And as far as, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and I was just gonna say, in a way, you are exploring your own world, and it's happening organically.
Yes.
And I just know from the stuff from my own personal experience of planning first world building and doing it organically that I prefer organically a lot more. And also, I mean, a lot of stuff
Yeah.
I love, that's how they developed. Like very few, I mean, unless you're like, I don't know, Tolkien or whatever, very few people can just sit down
Yeah.
and just develop everything beforehand. So that's awesome. Yeah, I like that approach to
Yeah.
it. But continue.
And I think too, like some of Robert E. Howard's method, right, where you could just see his evolution when you read those stories from Kull to Conan and cannibalizing stories, and I have a lot of what I call prototype moments, where I've written a story or a scene that I consider kind of like a prototype for a better scene that I write later.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I don't even get rid of the other one. I'm just like, maybe that's just echoes of concepts and themes and experiences over time, right? So a little of that certainly comes in, and you have to curate a little. But yeah, and to answer your question too about the ancients, really what I wanted there, I I originally was like, okay, so if I'm doing a fantasy world, like how did it all come to be? Why is it kind of like Earth and but it's not Earth, right? Why are the Kales like Gales or Celts, or like how did this happen? And at a certain point I was like, that doesn't matter. It can just
Yeah.
be a planet in a or maybe it is the same world, or maybe it's like I didn't really at a certain point I stopped worrying about that. But I originally had an idea where this world that I've created is a sort of seed planet. So these ancients would essentially, and then this part is kind of stuck, right? The idea that they can travel from world to world. There's no real wires. You can't get a sense of their technology. However they're moving, it's more all organic and even, anyways.
Yeah.
So I I kind of had originally thought, well, maybe they took samples from Earth, right? And then just spat them out. Maybe they went to Earth in medieval periods or various periods, collected things, and then spat them out in another world.
Right.
I'm not saying that's what is happening in my setting because
Mhm.
it's not, and I'm not really committed to that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how the ancients started, right? This seed, they were like these gods who did seed racing all over the cosmos. And so that's kind of where some of that comes from. Um, and I mean, I don't know. To me, philosophic, like I'm not a religious person. I'm not I don't believe in benevolent God or anything like that. I feel
Yeah.
like that doesn't work for me.
Hmm.
Um, and so I kind of uh, I have to think, well, okay, so where did we come from? Are we living in a simulation? Are we,
Mm.
what the hell is our existence? I can kind of ask those questions and speculate in my own fiction, right? So I wanted mostly mysterious beings who created or built or engineered other life. But we don't see any of the tubes or the wires or the DNA. Like I keep all of that away, and I always will.
Hmm.
We're never going to get those answers to questions. We're not going to see spaceships
Hmm.
because I don't know. I heard a long time ago too that people wanted to see more sort of cosmic or Sword and Planet in Sword and Sorcery.
Right.
But Sword and Planet always kind of fell off for me, where it's like, it's too connected to our world. I don't want
Mm.
someone from Earth in fantasy stories. I've always detested that, even as a child, with the
Mm.
exception of like He-Man. It's pleasing that, and especially in the world of self-publishing, right? There's no you can't,
Mm.
right? You can write the sort of thing that you want, and people often worry about things being canceled or, oh, you can't do that anymore. And it's like, I don't even think that's true, man. I think you can do most things as long as you do them well
Mm.
and with an iota of respect for your audience and for the world around you. People will respond, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to tell bad intentions, right?
Hmm.
I think.
No, I agree with that. I'm very happy with indie at the moment. I mean, we've seen it with video games. We're seeing indie video games.
Yeah.
We're seeing indie tabletop RPGs, and now we're seeing indie books become more of a thing. Indie magazines, and that's very, very good because now you could. It is
Yeah.
now viable. It's viable now to what's the word I'm looking for? Like target niche fan bases because in the 80s you
I
had to
do.
target things that were accessible for the general audience in the 80s. You don't have to worry about that anymore as much.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a little bit. Would you
No.
say it's harder? I wouldn't say so. I think.
I think now that it's all about just navigating the social networking space,
Yeah.
right? And getting visibility and getting your signal boosted, right? Right. Like, which is why it's why I like reaching out to you.
Mm,
It's why I like doing Rogues in the House, because we got to boost each other's signals here, because there is a niche. And I mean, we have to be able to reach each other.
mm,
And you've got algorithms that are suffocating attempts to boost those signals. And so we got to be smart about it, and we got to help each other out.
yeah.
Um, and so I think we're in an awesome time where you can really write or focus on whatever creative effort you want, and you will find an audience, right? Whether it's small. I mean, I don't, the amount of books that I have sold on this first release have staggered me.
Mm,
Not because I think I sold a stupid amount, but because it far exceeded my expectations. And I've only had 3 days where I didn't sell a book, and every other day I sold mostly more than one.
yeah.
And so this is a month later, and it keeps going. And so it's like something is clicking. I'm
Mm,
getting these things out there. Um, and it's a fun, it's a fun approach, right?
yeah.
Sword and Sorcery right now, there's been things said and written about it that there's a glute or a glut, or I don't even know how you pronounce it. Glutes or butt cheeks to me, but
Yeah.
whatever. There is a lot, and there's too much to even buy and consume on the indie circuit alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know if that's a problem. I don't
Mm,
I think that having all those options is great, and I think that every person out there who wants to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard should feel enabled to do so, and to find an audience, right? And I think that ultimately, with indie stuff too, the thing that I think really shines about that is that the really good stuff, quality stuff, will sustain. It
yes.
will find a place. It might not go huge, but if it stinks, or if it's no one really likes it, then it's not going to survive. It's not like, everyone rails against Disney, and I'm not like, I love Disney. Trust me.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
that they can put out crap and still sustain, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they put out masterpieces when they let
Mm,
people, creatives, do the thing.
yeah.
But on the indie circuit, it's like the crap will very quickly disappear. It can't
Mm,
sustain because it needs the niche to come support it.
mm,
And so I don't know. It's kind of, it weeds out certain things perhaps. And
right.
there's so much good work out there right now, and so many good creatives and publishers, that, like, it's an awesome time if you're into this shit.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm still at a phase. I'm slowly trying to move into reading new stuff, but I'm still at a phase where I still want to read more Wagner, more Fritz Leiber. I'm still like in that sort of phase, but
Yeah.
I'm really impressed. Like I'm impressed with like Tales from the Magician's Skull, for example. I mean, goddamn, they got San
uh,
Julian. They got this guy. This guy
I
put on
know.
my wall. I
I
can't
know.
believe it.
I know. Dude, one of the like I was published in issue 10, and San Julian is on the cover, and so is the word John. Okay? It's not a cover based on the story of mine
Yeah,
within,
yeah, yeah,
but I was like, shit.
yeah,
That's it. I'm great, you know.
yeah. We're
And
we're set.
to say nothing of the sort of the Conan artists who, the world class artists who are doing Conan work on books in which I've done so much writing. It's like, God damn it. Because I always wanted, I kind of wanted to be a visual artist at one point, but
Mm,
I didn't really have the raw talent, and I was too
yeah.
lazy to develop it in my young years. And whatever. I'm super happy that I've kind of settled on writing for expression, especially without, I'm not worried about an agent. I'm not worried about doing, the trad publishing thing. This is a gas. It is fun. And my God, I'm just so grateful people are throwing a few shekels my way to see what I've got. And I don't know, man, the response has been awesome. So.
I want to bring up a quote
Mhm.
because we were on Disney. There's a quote by I'm gonna butcher his name, Joss Whedon. He's of Marvel fame.
Joss Whedon.
Joss Whedon, and he made
Yeah.
this quote, which is very. I have mixed feelings about it. It says, "Make it dark, make it grim, make it tough, but for the love of God, tell a joke." Now, there are a lot of people who do not like this
Yeah.
mentality, and I've seen personally stuff that I enjoy get absolutely ruined by this. It's something that I was so thankful for, is that you had a lot of humor in the first story in particular, where Maxis is like, goes into the body of the king, and he trips over like the urine bucket. Like, there's a lot of funny moments, but particularly
He
towards
finds
the end.
himself in a big fat body.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are a lot of moments where you just let the drama marinate, and you don't ruin it. And that's something that I think a lot of people, and I definitely haven't, I'm not, this is something that I'm still learning. But how did you find that balance of like writing jokes and keeping drama and all that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And I don't know if I know how to answer it. So Joss Whedon is kind of, a lot of people have mixed feelings on that guy for a variety of reasons, but some people will blame him for sort of creating the quippiness of Marvel. And like, I'm not against that necessarily, especially when it's done well. Like
Yeah.
Robert Downey Jr. can spill that shit and make poetry with it, right? Like it's one of those maybe don't do it unless you do it really well kind of things. But that is not a form of humor that I can do. That said, I would say my greatest raw talent is that I can make people laugh.
Yeah.
And I never really did anything with it. And as far as creative disciplines go, one of the ones I have the most respect for is stand-up comedy, because I think that is a live or die situation, and there's so much skill and deftness to that that I respect it deeply. And there's times where it's like I've been able to sort of command a room with funniness. Everyone's having drinks and this and that, and I can make people laugh. So I would say that humor comes a little bit natural to me, probably because I'm a middle child and I grew up in the shadow of an older brother who was way cooler than me, and so I had to shine in my way. But a few things opened my eyes with that, and the works of Joe Abercrombie are fairly influential on me. I like the fact that he has these characters who will just, they seem really real, in the sense that sometimes the funniest people you ever meet are just roughnecks, or they're just like a dude who does pipe fitting, and like for whatever reason this guy's funny as shit, right? And so I wanted to bring a little of that in there naturally. And I mean, for me, it's just, yeah, it's how I react to the world, man. It's how I process trauma. It's how I make friends. It's how I have wooed women, I guess, over the years. I'm married now, but it's, everybody enjoys having a laugh. And so why are we going to have these stories with humorless characters? And in fact, the number one turnoff for me in fantasy is humorless fantasy.
Yeah.
I'm reading The Black Tongue Thief right now by Buhlman, I think it's his name. He did Between Two Fires, which was a little more humorless but still had humor. Abercrombie does it. Who's the guy? Kings of the Wild, Nicholas Eames, Michael R. Fletcher. Like I read a lot of modern, darker, grittier fantasy that had that element, and I was like, well, shit, I want to do that. I've said many times, fantasy is my favorite genre, but I hate most of it, and that's true, because it needs to have fun, but not necessarily in that Joss Whedon way, right? I don't necessarily need I don't need quippy characters. I just need characters that seem real and who are people who are drunks, people who are pissed off, people who want to get laid, people like, there's all kinds of ways to make things funny. And the human element will always be funny. And I don't know, it's interesting that you mentioned that the humor in that first story, because that's the only one from Maxis's point of view, and he probably doesn't strike you as that funny of a character or a humorful character,
Hmm.
but he's also a guy who's lived many, many lifetimes.
Yeah.
If he didn't pick up any sense of humor over that, god damn. I mean, how
Yeah.
can you even be intelligent, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, how could you? Yeah. So that's,
Right.
I mean, Lochmannen, on the other hand, is, he's more of a somewhat surly, but also kind of jolly in a rough around the edges way.
Yeah.
Um, he's the more, he's more me. Um, and the joke there is that he has a strong constitution, basically, is why Maxis wants him. This guy can
Mm.
take lumps to the head.
Yeah.
He can just endure shit.
Hmm.
And I'm the opposite.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will get sick very easily. I will get motion sickness very quickly. So it's like I wanted to take a little of my attitude and then give it some power behind it, give it an
Yeah. Yeah.
engine.
Yeah.
Well, and you originally asked too, like, how do you strike the balance? I think
Hmm.
so.
Yeah.
That is the tricky bit, but it's like the truth is, you have to, in that if you don't, I mean, maybe it's not the humor or the relatability necessarily that's charming you about the characters, but there has to be something that is making you give a crap about them. Even
Hmm.
in horror movies, which,
Yeah.
like, I'm a junkie on that, and we talk about indie markets and indie creators firing on all cylinders. Horror has and continues to do that all the way, right?
Hmm.
Horror for filmmaking is, I love digging into that because there's always creative things happening and you can make the best horror movie on like $2. But anyways, uh, the humor for me is the part that lets you invest in the characters or want to keep turning the pages. And if you don't have that, then any sort of pathos or impact you want to have later is not really going to work because you don't care. You don't really, you don't have to like the characters, but you have to like wanting to see what happens next, right?
Yeah.
They don't have to be fully likable, but humor, I think, is my way of doing that. I think it's my way of uh, getting the human angle in there in the
Yeah.
best way that I know how. That's, a lot of things have come up in my life. Like, uh, my life's been awesome all the way around, but so certain darknesses and horrible situations have come up that we've endured, with my family and things like that. And my role has always sort of just been, all right, I have to kind of be the person to articulate, what do we do with this tragedy? What can we do with this? And to spin comedy out of it at any moment I can. Like, I lost
Mm.
my brother, and he and I were laughing about dark shit up until the last moment. Because what else are you gonna do, man? Life is can be cruel and dark and not give a shit about you. But you got to be able to laugh in its face, or it'll win.
Yeah. Oh, that's a powerful statement, and I think in a way that is sort of the ethos of sword and sorcery, isn't it? I mean, Conan can be
Yeah,
locked up in the
yeah, yeah.
darkest, deepest dungeons with a giant snake, and he'll always find a way to get out of it. And I actually
Mhm.
remember what I wanted to say. I had that also when I was starting to learn about Howard, because previously I'd never heard of
Mhm.
Howard before, and it shocked me how young he was when he died. I think he died when he was 30, and just like
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
remember I was reading the one of my favorite monologues of Conan, the one where he's with Queen of the Black Coast. My two favorite monologues from there is when he's talking about the judge clopping off the judge's head, but also talking
Oh,
about life. Yeah,
yeah.
it's such a great one. But also the talking
Oh, I
about
love that.
life. This can be an illusion or not, but I don't care. I'll still
Yeah.
fight. And I just couldn't believe that someone that was roughly my age would write something beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And if that's possible, why shouldn't I give it a shot too? Why shouldn't anyone else give it a shot too?
Oh, 100%. 100%. And I mean, Howard was probably a guy who just, he had that privileged store of talent, right? Because
Absolutely.
there's talent and there's skill, right? Um, some people are super talented artists, but they still have to, I mean, visual artists, but they still have to develop those skills to
Mm,
become masters, right? And so
yes.
we start from different levels of privilege as far as our natural talents, right?
Yeah.
But it is amazing to think that Howard, as a young man, wrote those things. Like I straight up, there's no way that up until right now, maybe 5 years previously, could I ever have written anything truly compelling. I was just too green about too many things in life.
Yeah.
And as I say, life punching hard over the last few years, and it continues to do so in
Mhm.
in some corners. Um, that is the sort of stuff that it brought me a wisdom that I think that I needed, or even a emotional maturity, right?
Right. Yeah.
And some people grow up a lot faster, right? And so, I see this all the time in my work. You can tell the kids who've had rough years coming up, and they have a certain maturity about things that the sheltered people do not.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it is amazing that he was a young man writing that stuff. I mean, right now he sounds like a freaking university professor compared to my prose.
Yeah.
And I've gone to university. Like, I've done all those things, right? Like,
Yeah.
but you're right. That the part with the judge, I love that so much.
Mm.
Like, it's just it's such a brilliant character building moment of, well, obviously I had to cleave his skull. I couldn't give up my friend, right?
Yeah.
That says so much about who he is. He's just telling the story about it. It's
Mm.
crazy. It is amazing.
Yeah.
And
No.
I definitely ripped off a part. Well, I would say it's more of an homage in Cries from a Sleeping City.
Right.
Lochmanon is finding his way out, and he's like, this place is burning down. There are worms squirming out of the sewers. There's giant beasts eating people. He gets to that ship and he's like, push off or I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah.
Move. And eventually the captain is like, yeah, I guess we better go.
Words of wisdom to fellow creatives who want to write, get into podcasting, but what sort of advice would you give for getting over doubt and distractions and accomplishing your dreams?
Woo. I
Yeah.
mean, that's like I could do a TED talk on that, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I've covered some of it already. I would say the doubt, you need to just tell that mother effer to go.
Mm.
Now, I mean, I say this as somebody who I'm on anxiety meds, dude. Like, I understand doubt. I understand. Uh, I am someone who most people who know me would probably tell you I'm ultra confident, even conceited, arrogant. These might be adjectives that are lodged against me. But the truth is, at the core, I'm viciously insecure, especially about matters of expression in art. Now, I've gotten much better because, you get enough validation to a point where you just have to believe, you have to have faith in people that are buying things and reaching out to you in cold calls and saying, man, this was great. I love it. And, you have to tell your doubt to shut up at a certain point. But I would say, take the time to build up your confidence on the thing and believe that you have something to offer. I mean, that took me a long time. But I think it's important. Also, make sure you don't sell yourself short with a flimsy presentation of things. I'm terrible with graphic art, right? I cannot do that. So I hire people to do that. Also, no one can truly be your own editor. You can get really good at it, and you can learn your own quirks, and you can weed out, certain things, like, and this ties into rookie mistakes, like your info dumping, or you're telling when you should be showing, or you can do that. But at a certain point, once you feel like you have done your own research, your own work, your own homework, hire a fresh set of eyes, but like a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And just pay the money. Get a developmental editor who has done things, and eat a few $100 and throw it at them for a short story or something. All of that is good information. Have a community in which you are not an asshole. Like, be nice and supportive and attentive, and don't make assumptions. There's a lot of rad folks out there, and we're all just trying to express ourselves with this storytelling. Get involved with that. The whole like, I'm the reclusive creative who, like, you can't be Alan Moore on the indie circuit if no one knows who you are. Do you know what I mean? You can't do it. You have to. I mean, you can take that approach, and but like, I don't know, man. Like, help each other out. Jump into the community aspect of things. Those are my main bits as far as writing goes. Yeah, get yourself out there and like make friends and don't be a shithead.
Yeah.
That's my main bit of advice. We don't all have to agree on things, and there's many things on which we can agree to disagree, but like, just don't be a dick is my main piece of advice. And I I say that as someone who probably was a bit of a dick in high school, and like, you know, I learned, I don't know, but it all stemmed from my own insecurities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like an old soul now who's like, well, kids, be good to be excellent to each other, and do your best work, man.
Yeah.
And hire others to do great work to help you.
Oh yeah.
That's my best bit. Yeah, man.
Amen.
Thanks for having me on, dude. It's been a dish. You know, thank you for having me on, and like, thank you for buying the book.
And yeah, it was
my
a great
pleasure.
read. It was a great read. Thank you for reaching out. And until our paths cross again, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm sure they will in this niche community, my man.
Yeah.
May your swords always remain sharp, is what we say on the Rogues in the House podcast. So you can end with that.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll steal your song too. I won't do that.
I mean, if you need an Arnold, you know, you need an Arnold soundbite, you know who to talk to.
All right. say that with the Arnold soundbite, and we'll finish up there.
Okay, you want to hear that?
Yeah. Let's go.
And may your swords always remain sharp, you bastard.
Amen.